In this episode, we turn to a topic that matters to almost every new technician because so many support problems and security problems meet at the same place, which is the Windows endpoint sitting in front of a user every day. A Windows system is where people open email, browse the web, install software, access shared files, and store work that may matter to the whole organization. So it makes sense that it is also one of the first places attackers try to reach. When students first hear about endpoint security, they sometimes imagine a single protective product standing guard and blocking everything bad, but real protection is built from several layers working together. Windows includes built-in protections that help with malware detection, traffic filtering, account control, permission boundaries, updates, and data protection, and each one solves a different part of the problem. The goal is not to make the computer hard to use for no reason. The goal is to make the system strong enough that ordinary mistakes, unsafe software, stolen credentials, and lost devices do not immediately turn into major damage. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at CyberAuthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A stronger Windows endpoint begins with understanding what it is being protected from and why these protections are grouped together in the first place. Attackers want easy access, persistent access, or valuable data, and they usually look for the simplest path rather than the most dramatic one. That path might be an unpatched system, a user running with too much power, a disabled firewall, weak local settings, or a laptop that stores sensitive information without encryption. From a technician's point of view, Windows security is not only about stopping a direct attack from the outside. It is also about reducing harm when a user clicks the wrong link, installs a risky application, shares a device carelessly, or leaves a machine behind in a car or conference room. The important thing for beginners to see is that each built-in protection addresses a different kind of weakness. One tool may help detect malicious files, another may limit network exposure, another may control what a user is allowed to do, and another may keep stolen hardware from turning into exposed data. A lot of students start with Defender because it is the most visible protection on many Windows systems, and that makes sense because antivirus and anti-malware protection are what many people think of first when they hear the word security. Defender matters because it watches for known malicious behavior, suspicious files, and harmful activity that might otherwise run quietly on a system. It gives Windows a baseline ability to spot trouble before a user even notices something is wrong, and that is valuable in a world where malware may arrive through email attachments, browser downloads, removable media, or compromised websites. Still, the bigger lesson is that Defender is not meant to be the entire answer. It is one layer in a broader defense. If a user has too much permission, if the system is badly out of date, or if sensitive data is left unprotected, then the presence of Defender alone does not fix those deeper weaknesses. A technician should understand Defender as a safety control that improves the endpoint's chances, not as a reason to ignore everything else. Firewalls are another layer that beginners often hear about without fully understanding their purpose, partly because the word sounds abstract until you connect it to everyday traffic moving into and out of the machine. A firewall helps control which network communications are allowed, which are denied, and which should raise concern based on rules and context. On a Windows endpoint, that matters because not every service, application, or connection should be reachable from every network the device touches. A system on a home network, a coffee shop network, and a managed office network does not face the same level of trust in each setting, so traffic control becomes part of reducing exposure. The firewall is not only about blocking obvious attackers from the internet. It also helps prevent unnecessary services from being open, limits paths that malware might try to use, and reduces the ways an endpoint can be contacted or probed. When people disable a firewall because something stops working, they may solve a short-term inconvenience while quietly removing a major security boundary that was doing far more than they realized. User accounts are one of the most important security decisions on any Windows system because the account determines what the machine believes the user is allowed to do. If every user signs in with administrator-level power, then routine mistakes become far more dangerous because software installs more easily, settings change more freely, and malicious code has more room to operate. By contrast, a standard user account limits what can happen without approval, which reduces the damage caused by accidental installs, unsafe macros, malicious scripts, or stolen credentials. New technicians sometimes feel pressure to solve every problem by giving more rights because it is fast and often makes the complaint disappear. The problem is that convenience today can become compromised tomorrow. Strong account practice means giving people the access they actually need and reserving elevated power for times when it is genuinely required. Windows security becomes stronger when accounts reflect job needs rather than shortcuts, because the system is far safer when everyday work is separated from high-risk administrative control. Permissions make that account model more precise by deciding what a user can do with files, folders, shared resources, and certain system areas after they sign in. It is not enough to know who the user is if the machine does not also enforce boundaries around what that user can read, change, delete, or execute. In a well-managed Windows environment, permissions help protect important data from casual access, prevent accidental modification of critical content, and reduce the chance that malware can easily reach everything the user can see. This is one reason security problems are often also file access problems. A person may be able to log in successfully, but still be blocked from opening a sensitive folder or altering a protected document, and that is often the correct outcome rather than a failure. Permissions can feel frustrating to users when they stop desired actions, but they exist because data does not all carry the same level of sensitivity. Good permissions help Windows treat ordinary documents, shared team materials, and restricted content differently instead of assuming all information should be equally open. Local security settings deepen that protection by shaping how the endpoint behaves before and after someone signs in. These settings influence things like password expectations, account lockout behavior, screen lock timing, sign-in restrictions, and other rules that quietly determine whether the system leans toward safety or toward convenience. One especially important Windows feature in this area is User Account Control, UAC, which helps separate normal use from actions that could change the system in a more dangerous way. UAC does not mean a machine is perfectly protected, but it does create an extra decision point before software or settings changes happen with elevated authority. That pause matters because many harmful actions succeed by blending into ordinary activity and hoping the user will approve them without thinking. A technician should see local security settings as the operating habits of the endpoint. They are the small rules that shape what happens when a user forgets, rushes, leaves a session unlocked, or tries to perform a task that carries more risk than it first appears to carry. Patching is another cornerstone of Windows security because even a carefully managed endpoint becomes weak when it continues running software that is already known to be vulnerable. Attackers pay attention to systems that are behind on updates because old flaws are often easier to exploit than brand new ones, and widespread weaknesses can be targeted at scale. For beginners, the key idea is that patching is not only about adding features or changing the way the interface looks. It is often about closing gaps that could allow unauthorized access, code execution, privilege escalation, or instability that weakens the system over time. Windows becomes stronger when the operating system, the built-in protections, and the applications running on the device all stay reasonably current. Delayed patching sometimes feels harmless because a machine may appear to work normally for weeks or months. The danger is that a system can look stable while quietly carrying known weaknesses that have already been documented, discussed, and actively sought by people who know how to take advantage of them. Encryption protects a different dimension of the endpoint by focusing on data rather than only on software behavior or network traffic. If a laptop is stolen, if a drive is removed, or if a device falls into unauthorized hands, encryption helps make the stored information unreadable to anyone who does not have the right access. That matters because endpoint security is not just about keeping attackers from logging in while the machine is on. It is also about protecting the information sitting on the device when the device is lost, retired, or physically compromised. Windows includes encryption options that can help protect data at rest, and their value becomes clear when you imagine how much sensitive material can live on one employee machine, even if nobody thinks of it as a server. Cached files, email data, saved documents, browser content, and temporary copies can all reveal more than people expect. Encryption is powerful because it changes the outcome of physical loss. Instead of a stolen device automatically becoming a readable pile of information, the data remains protected by design. What makes these Windows protections so useful is not that each one is perfect, but that they support one another when the endpoint faces ordinary risk. Defender may detect a malicious attachment, but if something slips through, limited user rights may reduce the harm it can cause. A firewall may reduce outside exposure, but if a user still downloads something dangerous, local settings and account boundaries may still slow or block the damage. Patching may remove known weaknesses before they are targeted, while encryption protects data if the machine is lost, and the other protections no longer matter because the device itself is gone. This layered approach is the heart of endpoint security. Windows does not stay secure because one product or one policy solves everything. It stays more secure when malware detection, network filtering, account control, permissions, updates, and data protection all work together. A technician who understands that relationship will make better decisions than one who treats each feature as a separate checkbox that can be enabled once and forgotten. Students often carry a few misconceptions into this topic, and those misunderstandings can create trouble later if they are not corrected early. One common belief is that antivirus alone makes the system safe, which leads people to ignore patching, permissions, and encryption because they assume the main protection is already in place. Another is that firewalls are only for servers or only matter at the edge of the network, when in fact endpoint firewalls still matter because every device can become a target or a stepping stone. Some users believe administrator rights make them more productive and therefore should be normal, but higher privilege increases the impact of every bad decision, every risky installer, and every stolen credential. Others think encryption is only for executives or for people who travel with especially sensitive data, even though many ordinary users carry information that would still cause serious problems if exposed. Clearing up these ideas is part of a technician's job because security improves when people understand the purpose of the controls instead of seeing them as random obstacles. Support work on Windows often sits right at the point where productivity and security meet, which is why technicians need judgment as well as vocabulary. A user may report that an application will not install, a shared file cannot be modified, a network service stopped responding after a firewall rule changed, or a login keeps prompting for extra approval. Each of those may feel like a technical nuisance to the user, but each one may also be evidence that a security control is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The technician's job is not to remove every barrier automatically. It is to decide whether the barrier reflects healthy protection, a misconfiguration, or a real business need that should be handled in a safer way. That requires understanding why the control exists. When a technician grasps how Windows security features contribute to a stronger endpoint, they are less likely to solve problems by weakening the system and more likely to solve them by preserving protection while restoring legitimate access. Consider a realistic example of how these layers work together on a normal business laptop. A user receives an email that contains a malicious attachment disguised as something routine, and the first hope is that Defender detects the file before it runs or flags suspicious behavior quickly after it starts. If the file attempts to reach out across the network or expose a service, the firewall may reduce some of those communication paths. If the user is running as a standard user instead of an administrator, the harmful code may have fewer chances to change the system deeply or install itself broadly. If the machine is fully patched, a vulnerability the malware expected to exploit may no longer be available. If the laptop is later stolen during the confusion of the incident, encryption may still protect the stored information from becoming an additional breach. No single control carries the whole story. The outcome improves because several Windows protections each make the attacker's job harder, each in a different way and at a different stage. As we close, the most important lesson is that securing Windows is really about building a stronger endpoint through many small, deliberate choices rather than one dramatic tool. Defender helps identify and block harmful activity. Firewalls reduce unnecessary network exposure. Accounts and permissions limit what users and software can do. Local security settings shape daily behavior. Patching closes known weaknesses, and encryption protects data when the device itself is no longer under safe control. These protections matter because Windows endpoints are where users work, where data lives, and where ordinary actions can either stay routine or become incidents depending on how well the system is protected. For a new technician, the goal is not to memorize a list of security features and move on. The goal is to understand what each layer is protecting, what weakness it addresses, and why a stronger endpoint comes from combining them rather than relying on any single one of them to carry the burden alone.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.